What if I told you that the death penalty is not the worst type of punishment available in the American justice and prison system? Yes, there is one punishment that actually can top this. As the warden of this specific facility called this prison a fate worse than death, also called it a cleaner version of hell. This is the story of ADX Florence, United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum, or ADMAX Florence, also nicknamed the Alcatraz of the Rockies. The initial idea for this prison began in 1983 when 2 prison guards were killed by inmates at the then most maximum security prison in the United States prison system at Marion, Illinois. And at that point, the Bureau of Prisons director, a man by the name of Norman Carlson, decided that they needed a purpose-built facility to control these men who already have life sentences, and further sentencing was not going to make any difference, and therefore they had zero regard for human life. And so Marion was turned into a total full-time lockdown facility in 1983 after these murders, and this continued until ADX Florence was ready and opened in 1995. ADX Florence got its name because the closest town to it is Florence, Colorado. And this prison houses the absolute roll call or dishonor roll of the worst prisoners in the American penal system. It is designed to completely isolate prisoners from the real world with no contact to the outside world whatsoever, and to make this prison absolutely positively 100% inescapable, which since the 1995 opening has proven true. There's never been a single escape from ADX Florence, and the conditions that these prisoners are put through absolutely removes any chance of escape or recommitting of violent activities against prison guards. Now, so you're asking, how hard can it be and how do they achieve this? Well, it's a little complicated, but this prison was purpose-built for this specific reason. In an area that already has many, many prisons, the local residents of Fremont County, Colorado, came up with $160,000 to buy the land upon which ADX Florence would eventually be built. The lure of relatively high-paying correctional jobs was too much for them to resist. And so, construction started in the late 1980s, was eventually finished in 1994. Let me go through some features of this prison at first, and a little bit more into how it operates, and you'll see why I'm saying what I'm saying about this being worse than death. ADX Florence is built in such a manner that a prisoner does not know where they are in the facility at any given time. The ADX Florence is separated into several wings of various security measures. The most extreme of which is called Range 13, which is full isolation, only has 4 cells, complete and total isolation from the rest of the world and from the rest of the prison. These are solitary confinement cells all a prisoner does is sit in their cell pretty much around the clock. Now, within the cells themselves, these cells are about the size of my shoe closet, and I live in a modest apartment. And in this case, that's the size of the entire cell. Now, to prevent that, here's how extreme it gets as far as preventing any measures of escape. Everything is built as concrete that is carved out of the walls and the floors themselves. So the bed, for example, is a concrete shelf with maybe a very thin layer of mattress that is glued to the concrete. There's no pillow to speak of. No real blankets to speak of, because those could be used to facilitate an escape or facilitate a suicide, which they are definitely looking to prevent. The bathrooms. The showers are run on timers. Again, concrete embedded into the walls. The showers operate on timers. They do not. The prisoner doesn't have control over the temperature of the water or how long it lasts. And it usually lasts, less than 2 minutes, reports are told. What this does is it prevents the shower from being plugged, or basically create a situation where pipes would burst and create an escape route that way. The sinks, again, fully concrete. The taps are not controlled by the prisoners. They are, once again, like the showers, operated on timers. The chair in the cell, again, a concrete block that is part of the overall concrete structure. The desk, same thing. A concrete top. The pens are of limited ink and they are of limited use. Again, a pen could be used as a weapon, and so they are trying to take that possibility out of the prisoner's hands entirely. In most prisons, prisoners go to a mess hall or a dining room and get served their food on trays. Not so at ADX Florence. Prisoners don't leave their cells for that reason at all. Instead, they get room service, but it's food that is served through a hole in the wall on a tray through a slot, and it goes to the prisoner that way. The food is of very poor quality. It is said that the average meal budget for ADX prisoners is $3.50 daily. That's all 3 meals, by the way, combined. Burgers are not even beef. The food is usually lukewarm or cold. And, potatoes have about the consistency of mush. And so that is life there. As far as TV and things like that are concerned, they have an in-wall TV that some prisoners can get, with good behavior. Otherwise, there's no access to external entertainment. And to the lucky prisoners that do have access to a TV, or they have one that turns on, the only programming that's available is religious programming, or maybe crafts programming, or religious programming. They're not going to get Survivor. They're not going to get American Idol or Hell's Kitchen. So That's what passes entertainment. Are they able to read books? Well, the answer is actually yes. And the books can be checked out of the prison library, and like their food, it's delivered through that same slot. Now, do they ever get out of their cells at all? Well, 1 hour per day is so-called quote-unquote outdoor recreation. However, what this amounts to is they are put into another concrete pit with a basic plastic covered type of ceiling, and the pit you can walk basically 10 feet or 10 steps in any direction, forwards and backwards or sideways, left and right. So that is what counts as recreation. And they're always watched by the prisoners, and they're never taken out of their shackles. So a session of Pilates is just not in the cards. As far as what they can do during the day, it's very limited. You know, if they have good behavior, they can watch the in-room TV. Do these prisoners have the ability to communicate with each other? Generally, no. They're kept isolated from each other. You can spend years here and not have any contact with any other human being other than the prison guard who passes your food tray through the slot. Attempts to communicate with each other are generally made through the toilet, believe it or not. Sometimes it is possible for somebody to yell into the toilet and maybe get somebody back through the pipes, internal pipes within the prison. And as far as natural light is concerned, other than that little prison pool concrete shell that they get 1 hour a day, for the other 23 hours a day, the only possibility is, well, there is a window of quote unquote in the rooms. However, it's basically 4 inches wide and it's 48 inches top to bottom. It's a slit. If the sun is pointed the right direction, you might be able to catch a ray of sunlight maybe for 40 minutes a day if you're lucky. It's called the Alcatraz of the Rockies, but you don't get the mountain views. This prison is designed so that a prisoner can't plan an escape because they don't know where they're located in the prison at any given time. Now let's say somebody does escape from their cell or overpowers a guard. Not that that has ever happened. There is a central control room in the prison. One button, basically like the nuclear button for the president. A prison guard can punch this red button, and every gate and door and cell in the prison locks immediately. Thousands and thousands of doors and cells will immediately lock, and all movement within the prison or between corridors or wings is blocked. Now for a Hall of Fame of who is and has been kept here. The most notorious prisoner in ADX Florence right now is Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the former drug kingpin of the Sinaloa cartel, who by his own admission has killed at least 2,000 people by himself. And his cartel, of course, has killed tens of thousands above that. This man is likely the most dangerous man in the entire system. In Mexico, his prison escapes are the stuff of legend. In one instance, he had his cartel dig a tunnel underneath from a nearby farmhouse to a spot right below his shower in the Mexican maximum security prison, and it was dug with ventilation, lighting, and a motorcycle provided at the bottom of the hole, in which Guzman dropped through, landed, got on a motorcycle, drove his way down this nearly mile-long tunnel to freedom. There's also one other incident in which he escaped in a laundry basket from another maximum security prison. Before any of this, he actually was in his, prison of his own conditions, akin to what Pablo Escobar did in Colombia in the decades before, where he had his own private prison, where he had his own parties, his own personal chefs. Guzman copied this. He would have basically his own prison, which, given how much of a wanted man he was, this type of prison was more to protect him from the outside than to keep him from breaking to the outside. But he had prostitutes in there. He had a chef. He had his own security detail. Liquor, the finest food, and everything else was brought into the prison for him. So this man has a history of outrageous escapes and outrageous thumbing of his nose at the legal and prison systems in Mexico. What are his chances of escaping ADX Florence? About the same as me being elected the Pope, and I'm not even a Catholic. Given the fact that this entire building is built entirely out of concrete, breaking a hole through the bottom below the prison, which, again, below the prison, the foundation is several feet thick. So to even get underneath this concrete wall or shell of a prison is virtually impossible. Then you have to drill your way through that several foot thick concrete foundation to do it. The Mexican prisons didn't have this. So you're talking about equipment that his crew would never possess. Not to mention, this is in such a remote part of the Colorado Rockies that just getting there would be nearly impossible. Made even more impossible by the fact that it has concrete walls around the facility with guard towers, with dozens of men in these towers that have orders to shoot to kill, akin to the Berlin Wall. And we all know how that went. So even if a prisoner got lucky enough to get to the outside, they got to get past that too. And these concrete walls, again, go several feet down through the ground to make it impossible for somebody to dig their way under them. So Guzman is the most famous prisoner who is presently there. But some other ones include Richard Reed, the shoe bomber of 911, Zacarias Moussaoui, the only man ever arrested, Sonar Tsarnaev, the Boston Marathon bomber, Terry Nichols, the Oklahoma City bomber, is still there. His accomplice was there briefly. However, Timothy McVeigh did eventually face the death penalty himself, and so he escaped from ADX Florence in the most uncommon way possible via the death penalty. He was then transported to the federal death penalty or death row cell in Terre Haute, Indiana, where he was executed in 1990. I believe it was 1998. I'm sorry. 2005. McVeigh was executed at that point. He ultimately escaped ADX Florence through the death penalty. The men who are presently held there are not going to be as fortunate because, let's face it, death penalty appeals make the death penalty extraordinarily expensive to administer in the federal or state prison systems. So keeping these men at the ADX ADMAX Alcatraz of the Rockies is honestly probably the most cost-effective way of dealing with them. Excuse me. Also, who previously held the ADX Florence? Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. He died in the prison, so that's really the only way, other than the McVeigh route, that you're getting out of this place, is in a coffin. Kaczynski died there of natural causes. The ACLU has had plenty to say about this prison, but they've not been able to really change anything at all. Because the mental strain that these men are kept under has caused, some criticism from groups like that. With that said, though, it's never made much of an impact because the men who have been placed in confinement at ADX Florence have largely earned their way there. Guzman earned his way there through his outrageous prison escapes in Mexico and his heinous crimes. Again, personally having killed at least 2,000 people in his criminal activities through the Sinaloa cartel. Of course, the bombers, the Boston Marathon bomber, the Unabomber, and the shoe bomber, they all earned their way there by their crimes. There are several other prisoners who have earned their way there by escapes from prisons. They need a facility that is guaranteed to hold them in. And this one has never had an escape, so they get there. Others have arrived there from killing other prisoners at other facilities. You kill a prison guard, that's going to automatically get you sent there. Again, these men are not arbitrarily held in these conditions. They have all, in their own way, earned their way here. So thus, you're not going to see a whole lot of protests trying to save El Chapo. There are, quite frankly, very few people who would like to ever see him get released from this place. El Chapo has taken the unusual course of taking all the time that he has in there to write letters nonstop to his attorneys on the outside. It is possible to mail letters in and out of ADX Florence. However, each one is heavily monitored, censored, redacted, etc. And they take the prison staff take very great liberties in restricting these types of communications. This is what has kept El Chapo largely from running his Sinaloa cartel from inside the walls of ADX Florence, like he has been able to run his cartel from the inside the walls of every other prison he's been in to this point. So so he uses his time to write letters complaining about the mental anguish and stress and the dehumanization of his treatment in the system. However, you're not going to find very many people sorry for him because of many people whose lives he's destroyed or killed. So these people have earned their way there. So therefore, sympathy for them is very low. What about phone calls, you say? Well, it is typical. The typical allowance for any prisoner is one phone call per month of 15 minutes each. That's it. And those calls are usually going to lawyers. Can families visit? Yes. But again, very restricted. the prisoner is usually in a room with a prison guard, right behind him, and all communication is done through a speaker, which is inside of a thick, bulletproof glass wall. So they can see each other, but barely. They can sort of hear each other through the screen, through the system. And again, those are usually limited to about 15 minutes per month tops. Now, in case you're wondering, given the fact that most people who have been sentenced to ADX Florence have then later died of natural causes in the prison, how any of this is really known, much of it is known through one man. It's the one man who has spent time there and been released. And his name is Sammy the Bull Gravano, a former member of the Gambino crime family of New York. He was also the principal figure in the murder of mob boss Paul Castellano, which he committed under the direction of then Capo John Gotti. Gotti never lived to see ADX Florence. He actually finished the rest of his life at the maximum security penitentiary back in Marion, Illinois. So Gotti did not live to get to ADX Florence. Although had he lived and not gotten throat cancer, he likely would have been wound up there. But Gravano is the one man through most of this information has come, because he's basically one of the very few men who have ever done time at ADX Florence, been released, and lived to tell the tale to the outside world. The reason why ADX Florence has come to my mind as of the filming of this is in the wake of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And people are saying, oh, we wish the death penalty was available. We want his killer to get the death penalty. Well, that's why I made this. He could actually be subject to much worse than the death penalty. And he's going to be charged with both state crimes, for which the top penalty is the death penalty, but there's also going to be federal charges involved, and that's where the ADX Florence possibility comes into the picture. And again, death penalty appeals can get very exhausting, financially draining, and cost both the state and everybody else a truckload of money. When there's no death penalty and the sentence is life at ADX Florence, there's going to be extensive appeals, and Joaquin Guzman is going through those right now, but they are not as expensive as they are in a death penalty case, despite the rather extreme punishment involved. There have been Eighth Amendment lawsuits filed against ADX Florence and the Bureau of Prisons, but they've never gotten anywhere, for the simple fact that while the Eighth Amendment does define cruel and unusual punishment, it always seems to come back that while the punishment of ADX Florence is extensively cruel, it's not extensively cruel and unusual in relation to the crimes committed by those who are in the prison. So that's why those challenges have never succeeded. Now, with that said, the next question, of course, is how many prisoners are in this place? The answer is, at any given moment, anywhere between 375 and 400. It's not much. And other prisons have a problem of having, 25 prisoners for every security guard, or worse. The reason why ADX Florence works as well as it does is because it's close to 1-to-1. One inmate for every prison guard. And when prisoners are being transported in different parts of the facility to or from the exercise cell, or possibly, they also keep them on the move between cells. Every month or two, they'll get moved to another cell just so that they don't get accustomed to where they are within the complex, and making escape planning impossible. So you got moving day. There's always moving days. And so the prisoners are always escorted by multiple guards and shackled in. Now, in case you're wondering what happens if a prisoner makes a break for a different direction while being escorted or shackled, well, the prison is full of pressure points, or basically they're built inside the floor pressure pads that can tell if a prisoner is going in a corridor he shouldn't be in. And once again, going back to that magic red panic button that's available, this can also trigger that prison-wide lockdown. So if they hit a prison pad or a pressure pad for a wing that they should not be in, their next door could be locked and they could be trapped. And then the guards just come to that area, they crack open the door just enough to get through, and then they take that prisoner back into full captivity at that point. So it's an internal apprehension that happens in those instances. The not the NAACP, but the or like Amnesty International, organizations like that, they have acknowledged that this is a very cruel and dehumanizing model, and that men who have mental illnesses or challenges go into this already damaged, and it just gets worse in there. But I have seen the ACLU make a concession that while this is a cruel and unusual method of punishment, the Federal Bureau of Prisons has basically executed this model about as well as possible. They do it on a level that the state prisons can't because, for starters, the federal facility at Florence has a 1-to-1 ratio of inmates to guards. So even if they wanted to band together, it would be very difficult to do. In practice, they can't outnumber the guards, basically, because even within the walls of the entire prison, they do not. Any small group would be overwhelmed immediately. These are reasons why this model works much better on the federal level than it does on any state level, because those are usually underfunded and only have the ability to do so much to keep prisoners at bay. But at Florence ADMAX, they have the numbers, they have the abilities, they have the tools, and they have the design. And that latter part is probably the most important. A purpose-built design that Marion didn't have and that no state prison has. The state prison with probably the closest capabilities to this is actually here in Minnesota at Oak Park Heights, Minnesota. They have a level 5 maximum security ADMAX unit here that is considered the best of the state models, because even though it doesn't have the concrete foundations and build of Florence ADMAX, the Oak Park Heights facility is built into a hill. So digging your way out is going to be very difficult, because even the Oak Park Heights prison does have concrete foundations upon which getting into from below is likewise impossible. And even the sides of the buildings are built into hills So breaking in from the side is a little bit harder than it would be anywhere else. But most of your state prisons are underfunded. They don't have the staffing ratio. And the purpose-built facility for this reason has been so far easily, not even close, the most effective version of this type of incarceration model. So you ask yourself, how do you avoid a place like this? Well, again, as I said before, this prison is built for the worst of the worst. So unless you're running drug cartels and killing millions like El Chapo, or well, not millions, but tens of thousands, at least like El Chapo, or unless you're mailing bombs like Ted Kaczynski, or blowing up federal buildings like Terry Nichols, you should never have to worry about even coming near this facility. So there you have it. A penalty worse than death. The story of administrative maximum security ADX Florence. Yes, you can do worse than the death penalty. I bet you some of these inmates wish they were given the death penalty. Given their isolation, social cutoff from the rest of the world that this facility administers. Cruel? Yes. Necessary? Also yes. Given just some of the names I've just read off, these are the who's who of the absolute worst. These are people who have proven capable and would absolutely break out of your normal maximum security state facility. But here, they have no chance. They're going to be stuck there for the rest of their sentences, which in most cases is life in prison. The reason why Sammy the Bull Gravano didn't get a full life in prison sentence is because he did cooperate with the conviction of Gotti. And that spared him either the death penalty or life in prison. This is why Gravano was able to get out and get released into the free world, where he remains to this date, not only telling stories about ADX Florence, but also telling stories about life inside of La Cosa Nostra, the mob, and the Gambino crime family. So anyway, there it is, guys. ADX Florence, worse than death. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of the previous warden. You folks have a great, fantastic night. I will see you later. Peace out, homies.